Yeah,
want to
exactly.
double
All right,
team up.
sounds good. Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our Profile T1 webinar. I am just going to, before we get started, I'll just share my screen. We'll fade the music out, and then we'll just get started. So give me a second here just to share my screen. And there we go. So let me just make sure everything's working properly. Yeah, it looks good. All right. Well, thank you for being here today. We're going to be talking about Profile T1. Let's just run through a few very quick introductory slides. My name is Michael Delaro. I'll be the presenter for today. And we'll be talking, as I said, about all things that touch on T2 for the new user. So important to note that this is, oh, Val is saying we're not seeing my slides. Okay, let me stop the share and let me try that again. Give me a second here. I might have shared the wrong screen. Let's see what's going on. Let me try that again. Share screen. And let me try it. It should be working. Let me try that again. So share that screen. So Val, if you could let me know if you're seeing everything now, that would be great. So
I'm seeing profile.
Okay, let me go over to PowerPoint.
Yeah, they were in the slide deck.
Okay, so
Okay.
you see everything now. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Val. All right, apologies for that little hiccup. So again, we're here to talk about T1. We don't have a lot of time, so let's quickly go through these introductory slides. As you can see, our webinar only runs until 2:15. We only have 60 minutes of presentation, and then we're going to try to open things up the last 15 minutes of our webinar. We're going to see if we can answer some questions for you. I'm really happy to report that I am not alone here today. You just heard Val's voice. Val is taking care of things in the background with Zoom. We also have Duncan Robinson, who's here with us today. Duncan and I have been doing these webinars for a few years now. Always a pleasure to work with Duncan. And he is the real profile expert. I'm not the profile expert. Duncan is. And if there's any questions that you may have, you can ask away. There is a screen that you could use to ask your questions. And Duncan will be monitoring that window and answer your questions in writing. And all we ask is to please limit your questions to today's webinar content. Oftentimes we have the urge to talk about who knows what, something touching on a T2 return or something like that. But what we're asking everyone is to please limit your questions to the discussion that we'll be dealing with today. You'll see our program in a second, the contents of what we'll be discussing. And if CPD credits are important to you, you are eligible for one CPD credit. And so you will get an email with your CPD credit immediately following our webinar. So who is the training session for? As we said, we're going to talk about T1s, and the focus is on new or recent profile users. So if you're brand new to profile, or if you've just started using it a short while ago, then you're definitely in the right place. We're going to bring you up to speed. We're going to introduce things at you at a pretty fast clip because, as I said, we've only got 60 minutes. I have to keep an eye on my watch to make sure I don't ramble on for too long. And so if you're interested in learning the basics, if you want to get up to speed really quickly, you want to learn some key functionality and maybe pick up a little tip or two, that's what we'll be dealing with today. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about why is Profile a good choice for an accounting and tax office. How do we get licenses? How do we manage our profile licenses? How do we get help? How do we set things up? And again, remember, we're addressing this webinar towards the new user. So we're going to talk about navigating and shortcuts, things of that nature. And we're going to walk through a very basic T1 return, show you how you could prepare a basic T1. How do you get the info to your client, the copy of the tax return? We'll talk about that in this section here under print PDF. And then we'll talk about Intuit Sign. Intuit Sign is a way for you to get your signature or your client's signatures on specific forms. So before we go any further, let me turn my screen off because I find it distracting. And so it's better if I just turn that screen off. And let's move on to the next slide. And important point, we are here to talk about Profile. We want to walk you through some basics in how to use Profile. We're not here, unfortunately, to answer any tax questions. So this is not a tax training webinar. This is a software webinar. As you well know, taxes can be quite arcane, quite involved, quite complicated, and a matter of opinion oftentimes. And so we're here to talk about Profile and not answer specific tax questions. So why Profile? Fair enough question, because there are so many choices that we've got today, and a lot more competition, if I could use that word, than there used to be a number of years ago. And so Profile is something that I've been using. I started using it back in 2000, I think it was. And I still use Profile. I don't have a tax office anymore. I don't have an accounting office anymore. I just work on webinars nowadays. But still, I still prepare tax returns for family and friends, and I still use Profile. And a bunch of reasons, as you can see right here, Maui, multiple application user interface, if I'm not mistaken. What that means is it works in a uniform manner. And so if you're used to using Profile T1 and you then need to use Profile T2 or T3 or FX, they all work the same way. So the learning curve is not steep. Once you get a few basics, you could work anywhere in Profile because it's uniform. And it's also comprehensive in the sense that I could work on at the same time, I could work on a 2024 or 2023 return and a 2022 return, have a T2 return open. It's all there. It's all in one window. If you have multiple windows, I could have a T1 on one window and one screen and T2 in another screen. Other key points about Profile. There's a very powerful auditor that runs, depending on the return, up to 2,800 plus diagnostic checks. So I call it my second set of eyes. Every time I worked on a tax return, I will always have a look at the auditors, see what it's suggesting, pointing out if I've forgotten something. That's what the auditor will do for me. comprehensive help. There's so many ways in which you can get help with Profile. We'll talk about that next. You can customize it, a whole bunch of ways for you to personalize Profile. We'll look at that a little bit today. Online tools, there's more and more online tools available. We'll touch on that very quickly. And also works with QuickBooks. So if you've got clients that are using QuickBooks, and they, especially on the T2 side, we talk about that in our T2 webinar. Of course, you can carry forward files from last year to this year, and you could also carry forward competing software files. So I one time, actually more than one time, I had clients would come in and they'd say, well, I did my own tax return last year and I was using TurboTax. Here's a TurboTax file. I could carry it forward. I would take their TurboTax file. At least I would know the address is there and, you know, the personal information is all there, and I could carry it forward. And so there's a whole bunch of other software applications that Profile works with in the sense of carrying forward those files from prior years. Of course, it works in all kinds of scenarios, all provinces. CRA autofill my return is available. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Online backup, a very cool tool that you could use to safeguard all of those tax files. Hopefully you're backing them up somewhere in your office, but you could also back them up online using Profile. And it's been around for a long time, and it's proven, it's reliable. It's something that many of us take for granted. And I know I've said this in other webinars, but I can't emphasize it enough. If you've ever worked with a software company that suddenly decides to abandon the market, it's happened to me twice in my career, where the software I was using disappeared for whatever reason. The software publisher decided to just close up shop or not support that product anymore. Not a pleasant feeling. All of a sudden, you've got all these tax files that you know you're not going to be able to work with next year because they're not supporting that product anymore. And so it always gave me peace of mind when I had my own office to know that when because of Profile, I could count on it. And so that was a reassuring feeling. What about help? We all need help. We all are, especially during tax time, deep in March and April, all of a sudden we're working on a tax return and not sure how to proceed, or Profile's not doing what we expect it to do, and we need some help. What's great about Profile is there are a bunch of help options available to you. You see we've got some web links here. Don't forget that you should have received a handbook, kind of a training guide, if you will, when you registered for today's webinar. And that training guide is specific to our T1 and T2 webinars. So you'll see in that training guide, there's all kinds of links for more information. So the training guide goes more in depth than we do today because we are limited for time. And it's got links to a whole bunch of resources online that you could follow up on, and including how to get help. But in a nutshell, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can get help in Profile. Of course, there's the help menu where you could get in-product help. And so if I go to Profile and I click on the help menu, I could select Profile help, and there's the in-product help. Notice that there are tabs with an index. I could do a search. For example, I could type in dividends, something like that. And I could get help that way. Notice that there are other resources up here. The website, you can go straight to Intuit Profile's website. And so you can get all kinds of help from the product itself. Just click on the help menu or hit F1 on your keyboard, and notice that there's other options here. There's a user guide you can download, not the user guide that we were discussing 2 minutes ago, which is specific to our webinar, but this is a more comprehensive user guide. It's over 200 pages that talks about all things Profile. And so you can see there's all kinds of options here, but you're not just limited to the help menu. There's the live community. So you could actually go online. And again, you will see this from the help menu, but it's also in other menus in Profile. You could even enable it. So as soon as you launch Profile, live community will open up. And this is a network of your peers. You could ask questions. You could answer other people's questions. You could just view the repository of all the questions that have been asked about a certain topic in Profile. So it's a wonderful resource for again, getting more help in Profile. If you're more comfortable in French, the live community is also available for people who are more comfortable with French language. Another option you've got, you could enable a live chat session. So right from inside Profile, you can again click the help menu and then select start messaging. And you could then chat with someone at support or care at Intuit Profile, and you could ask them your question and you could find out what you need to know in terms of using Profile. And so there's another resource available to you. Something that I always use and I really recommend, the webinars are great, but we're only running the webinars for a limited period of time. And certainly no webinars in March and April. You guys are too busy, of course, but there are videos available. So you could scroll through all the available videos, and you could find that under the training menu in Profile, select training, other training options, and you could go and view all the videos that are available. And when there were new features in Profile, like Intuit Sign, for instance, we're going to talk about Intuit Sign just a little bit later. But if you want to learn more about that feature, you'll see that there is at least one. I think there might be a couple of videos on how to use Intuit Sign, what it does for you. And that's just an example. There's all kinds of videos available to you to learn more about using Profile. So I strongly recommend that you have a look at those videos. And we're not done in terms of help options. There's tutorials. We talked about the training guide. There's also, if you want to know what's new about Profile, let me show you what I mean. Let's go over to Profile. So we talked about the help menu right up here, and we know that we could go to the in-product help. We can download a user guide, but you could also go to the training menu. And if you click on training, you'll see that there's all these guided tutorials on how to use Profile. And then if I click on other training options, I'll get brought to a website that shows me the videos we were talking about. Okay, so you could see that when you want to use Profile and you want to get help, don't just stick to the help menu. Go over to the training menu. Also, the online menu. If you go to the online menu, you'll see there's something called update information. And then from there, you could click on what's new. And you could find out what's been changed, added, or whatever the case may be for the latest release. And there's the latest Profile release right there, 2024.0.3. So you should be on that version. How do you find out what version you're on? Again, it's something you'll find under the help menu. And just go down to About. And there it is, 2024.0.3. And that's the latest version. And of course, as we get closer to the new year, you will see that Profile is going to start updating, I think, a little bit more frequently as things get ramped up for the tax season coming pretty darn soon now. It won't be that much longer. So there you go, a whole bunch of ways in which you can get help in Profile. Let's talk about setting up Profile. And so there's a few things, there's a whole pile of things you could do to personalize Profile, but there are certain setup options that you should immediately look at. Of course, you need a license. And so how do you find your license information? How do you manage your license? Again, let's go over to profile and show you very quickly. So again, if you go to help and then you go to manage licenses, this is where you would see your licensing information. This is where if you added a new module, let's say you only had T1 and now you want to put on T2, you could just click add new. You could purchase a license as well. So you could manage all your licenses from inside profile. If we go back to the presentation, to the slides, you'll see something called, excuse me, flexible licensing. Flexible licensing is a great way to suspend the license on one computer and use it on another computer. So if you've got more than one or two computers, let's say you've got a couple of computers at work and you've got another computer at home, and sometimes you want to work on profile from your home computer, then you can enable flexible licensing and you could, which allows you to use that license that you've got on your machine at home. And then when you get to the office, you could use one of your machines at the office. So that's how flexible licensing works. It's included in your license fee. It's included in your annual subscription, if I could use that word. Other settings to look at. Let's talk about e-file options. So yes, you will have to put in your e-file information. It's that easy to do. Just go over to the e-file menu. You could scroll down to options. And from there, we could click on T1 and you could see there's a wizard right here. So I could click on the T1 wizard and then I could just scroll through. It's kind of small on my screen. However, all it's asking me to do is put in my e-file online number. So CRA gave you a number, CRA gave you a password, and you put that information in there, click next. And of course, I don't have a number in there, so that's why I keep getting this warning saying you can't move forward. But that's really all you have to do is put in your e-file credentials. And that allows you, of course, to e-file your client's T1 returns. So let me close that window down. And the other area you'll want to spend some time in is the options menu. And if you click on options, environment, you'll see there's a whole bunch of tabs up across the top here. And so what you really want to do is select preparer and put in your preparer information, the name of your office, your phone number, your address, your represent the client credentials from CRA. All right, you can put all of that in this window. Okay. And then the other area I would strongly suggest for you to have a look is the file tab. So if you click on file, this is where you could tell profile where you want to save your tax files. And so depending on how your office is set up, if you're a sole practitioner, you've got one computer, odds are your profile is going to pick your directory for you. It'll be my documents, my profile data. And then for T1, you could then have a separate folder for each tax year. As you can see here, my profile data 2020 T1, 2019 T1, and so on and so forth. If you want to put your tax file somewhere else, as you can see, I could just change the directory for some of these tax files. I imagine that I was using OneDrive and I want to save my tax files in a OneDrive folder, then I could do that. I could tell profile where to put those tax files for those years, 2024, 23, and so on and so forth. Notice there's a lock checkbox. By default, that box is unchecked. I would strongly recommend that you check that box because that locks the location. So if you ever, for whatever reason, change the location, so for example, if I open up a tax file, and let's just pick something here. If I open up a tax file And I used to do this. Sometimes we would run some what if scenarios, and the client would say, well, what if I do this? What if I do that? And what I would do is I would click File, Save As, and then I would change the location. I didn't want to put this pretend file, this trial file with all my actual tax file. So I would actually go in here and I would put it on my desktop. So I would just change the location here and put it on my desktop. And then if I save that file, when I would go and open another file, let's go back to that options window. When I would try to open another file, ProFile would look in the location where I saved that last file because I did not check the box that says lock. And so very important to lock that location down. So if you do something like that, where you either save the file to a different folder, or maybe somebody gave you a file on a thumb drive, something like that, and you opened it from there, very possible that all of a sudden, when you go to open up another file, ProFile isn't looking where it should be looking. So you'll want to check that box that says lock. Okay, let's go back to our slides. Another important thing to look at is something called form selection. So everybody's different. We all have our own practice rules, if you will, about what do we give to the client. Once we've done their tax return, do we print out a copy of the tax return? Yes or no? Maybe we give them a PDF. Either or, whether we print it or we give them a PDF, what do we give them? Do we give them the full package with all the schedules? Do we just give them a summary? And so when I started using ProFile, what happened is I would click on file. Back then, we would print the tax return. So if I would click on print, I would then scroll through this window here and I would say, oh, I'm going to give them this schedule, and I would check the box, and then I'm going to give them this one. And every tax return I would do, and I would prepare and give the client a copy of the return, I would go in here and say, yeah, I'm going to give them this, I'm going to give them that, and I didn't know until a little bit later that I could actually set defaults. So I could go into options and I could select form selection, and from here I could say, by default, here's what I'm giving to my clients. I'm just giving them the T1 summary and a few schedules. So I would just pick what I wanted to give them. And you can see the list is extensive. So I would just pick, I could pick what I want to give my clients. And then I could even see right over here where it says print these sets or archive these sets. So if I want to actually print hard copies, I could select print these sets. If I don't want to give my client hard copies, I would deselect print these sets and then select archive these sets. And then I could make that a default for all of my clients. Okay, so very important for you to set those form selection options. And if you do decide that you want to give your client a PDF copy, then you could even go into the PDF settings and set all kinds of parameters in there. So let's have a look at that very quickly. Again, we go back to the options menu. So you can see there's so much choice in terms of personalizing your session, the way you want to work with ProFile. And so if I go to environment, there's a PDF tab here, and I could set all kinds of parameters here with PDFs. So for example, here I could set, where do I want my PDF copies to be stored? I could store them, as you can see, by default with the tax file, or I could say, actually, no, I want to save my PDF in a different location on my computer. I could even, if you look up here, I could even determine how I want ProFile to name those PDF copies. So I could say, every PDF I prepare for a client, I want you to name it with their last name, the tax year, the return type. And you could just click on these plus buttons here and choose how you want to name your T1 files, your T2 files, and so on. If you want to set a password, you could even tell ProFile to down here. You can see my mouse moving, I hope. You could then say, okay, I want you to create a password for my client files, and the password will be maybe their social insurance number, their business number for T2s, for example, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of options you've got when it comes to setting your PDF settings. So I really strongly encourage you to have a look at the options menu that we've been working in. And that's how you could start personalizing ProFile and set some at least mandatory key, if you, maybe it's a better word, default for your preparer settings, your file location, and so on. All right, so if you are brand new to ProFile, let's talk about navigating in ProFile. So how do we get started? How do we work in ProFile? So what's going to happen is you're either going to create a new tax return, carry forward a tax return, or maybe open up a tax return that you were working on yesterday. There are some icons on the ribbon here. I could select new return, carry forward, or open a return, or I could just go straight to the file menu and do the same thing, new, carry forward, and so on. Okay, and so that's how I could create a new tax file, carry forward, open an existing tax file. Of course, there's all kinds of forms and schedules that exist in a tax return, and we do not enter anything on the T1 jacket. So if I go to the T1 itself, there's going to be all kinds of information on that T1, and I don't put any information in the T1 jacket itself. So where do I put the information then? Well, I'm going to enter my information on a few different schedules. And so, and the other thing you'll see is that there are all kinds of yellow fields. And so if you look down here, there's a yellow field. Okay, if we go to the info tab, notice how ProFile opens up a tax return and gives me some tabs. There's an info tab, there's the T1 tab, there's a T4 tab. If I go to the info tab, can you just give me a second here? I just have to change a parameter here in the background. Just give me half a second and I'll be right with you. All right. Let me just get this set up. Sorry about that. Okay. And so what are all these yellow fields then? These yellow fields mean there's something we need to take care of. It could be missing information. So if I hover my mouse pointer over some of these yellow fields, a little message pops up telling me you didn't put a street address in, or up here, I put in a social insurance number. I hover over that field and it gives me a little window that says the social insurance number is invalid. Okay, so that's what the yellow fields are. That's the auditor doing its job. Okay, and if there's anything missing, if there's anything that might be incorrect, you're going to see a yellow field. Okay, now we already said that we don't put information in the jacket itself. So where do we put our information? Well, we know that there's all kinds of schedules. There's a T4, there's investments, there's all kinds of ancillary forms that we want to use. How do we find those forms and schedules? Well, that's where something called the Form Explorer comes in. And the Form Explorer is, as the name suggests, how we find what it is we're looking for. So for example, let's go over to ProFile. Where is the Form Explorer? I could press or click on this little plus tab. That'll open it up. But the preferred way, because it gives me more power, is hit F4 on your keyboard, and you're going to open up the Form Explorer window. And from there, I could type in the name of the form. So let's pretend I want to put in some T3 information. So I type in T3, okay? Notice that there's some filters here. There's identification, slips, and so on. Usually what I do is I just click all. So I say, look in all the forms, all the schedules, and then I'll type in the form I need. T3, for example. Notice how ProFile highlights the T3 slip. I could do something like DON for donations, and then ProFile highlights donations, and so on and so forth. Medical, I could type in MED, for example, okay? And then ProFile will jump to that form. I could click it and then open up that form. And so something you're going to get used to doing quite a bit with ProFile is hitting that F4 key, open up Form Explorer, type in the form you want to get. So for example, T3, and now I've got my T3 open. And notice how we've got all these tabs, okay? There's my medical, there's my T3, there's my T4. And that's how I would navigate in ProFile using Form Explorer. Something else you could do, if there is a form that you use a lot for all of your client returns, then you have the option of dragging it to what I call the jump bar. Okay, so if you look at ProFile, for example, one form that I always use with my clients was something called the 5-year summary. So if I had repeat customers, they would come in 2, 3, 4 years in a row. I could monitor this year's tax return last year. Now I'm in a 2022 return. That's why you only see 22 right here. But I could look at the 2022, compare it to 2021, 2020, and so forth. I always use the 5-year summary. I liked that form. And so what I could do with that form is I could click it, hold my mouse button down, and drag it up. It's already there, as you can see, summary. Oh no, that's the T1 summary, I'm sorry. So I could drag any one of these tabs over to the jump bar, and that way, when I needed to use a form, I could just click on it from the jump bar. So if I click summary here, there's my tax summary. There's my T4. So I've already got some forms that I use on almost every return. I put them on my jump bar here, and it saves me maybe 1 click or 2 clicks. I don't have to use Form Explorer anymore. I could just click on the jump bar to get to those often used tax forms. Another little tip while we're talking about tips, there's something called the Quick Start menu. So if we go over to ProFile, select Help, and then select Quick Start, this is a really great window that opens up, and I could see the files that I've been working on recently. Okay, so I could easily open up a recently used file. Maybe I was working in ProFile this morning, went out for lunch, came back, and I'm ready to get going again. It's a lot easier to find a history of the tax files I've been working on. I could also create a new return, open an existing return. I could click on the tabs. As you can see, I've got T2, depending on what your licensing gives you. I've got T2, T3, FX, T1, different tax years. Okay, so I could just navigate to my files or create new files right from the Quick Start menu. It also gives me all kinds of resources and other additional information. And if you like the Quick Start menu, which I do, you could check the box down here at the bottom that says use Quick Start as soon as you start ProFile. So this way, what happens is as soon as I launch ProFile, this window opens up. And then I could decide where I want to go in ProFile. And usually what happens when we open up ProFile is we want to reopen a file that we've already been working on maybe earlier today or yesterday or whatever the case may be. So that's how we use Quick Start. How do we find it? Very quickly, I'll show you one more time. Click on Help, go to Quick Start, and there's the window. Okay, let's go back to our slides and let's talk about the auditor. So as we already said, the auditor will run through 2,800 or more diagnostic checks. The yellow fields that we discussed, that's called the passive auditor. So there's no prompting from us that's required with the passive auditor. As you saw, if I go to the info tab, I've got all these yellow fields that the auditor does its thing, and I don't have to ask it to do its thing. It just does its thing on its own. However, I could ask to view the active auditor. The active auditor, if I click this little spyglass here, or hit F9 on your keyboard, you're going to see the window open up at the bottom here. And this gives me a list of audit messages. And notice that there are tabs. There's summary, warnings, notices, sign-offs, all kinds of tabs that I've got here. So if I go to the summary tab, that's a summary of all the other tabs that appear in here. Let me just widen this a bit. And so what I could do, therefore, is I could view all of these audit messages. And so, for example, this says taxpayer's address is missing. And if I double click that, ProFile is going to jump to that line and it's going to circle it for me and say, here's where your problem is. Okay. And I could do that for a whole bunch of areas in ProFile. Okay. So notice how it just jumps to the relevant form, circles the field or the line and tells me here's what's missing or here's what may be incorrect. So for example, if I go to a T4, and let's just put in very quickly a T4 slip very quickly. I'll just put in some employment income. Let's pretend 95,000, and then I'll put CPP, $1,000. And you'll notice that the passive auditor is telling me, oops, that doesn't sound right. $1,000 doesn't sound correct. So the auditor automatically checks to tell me that on a $95,000 salary, CPP should be more than $1,000. And if I scroll through the active audit messages, I would see in here, right here, it says T4 box 16 may be incorrect. And if I double click that, there you go again. ProFile circles that to say, are you sure the T4 says 1,000 for that field because it sounds incorrect? And we're going to talk about review marks in a second. So what you could do, if indeed the T4 shows $1,000, then you could use these little check boxes up here, and you could use either the preparer sign off or the partner sign off and say, yeah, I know that's the 1,000 is not correct, but that's what the T4 says. And you can put a check mark next to it. And that way you kind of override the audit message and say, listen, yes, I know, but that's what it is. And so this is how you could use those review marks. We'll come back to review marks in a second. Okay, I've only got 15 minutes left. So let me show you very quickly a few other things. Believe it or not, font colors mean something in ProFile. Let's go back and show you. Notice, if you look at the screen, we've got some colors, the font is black. Some others, the font is blue. Some others, the font is green. That is actually not haphazard. That actually means something. And as you use ProFile more and more, you'll soon discover that this is very helpful. When you see black font, that means it's a user entry field. I type in the information, all right, and it's black. If you see blue font, that's a calculated amount that ProFile plugged in there, okay? There's all kinds of fields that are calculated by ProFile. I could override those fields, and look what happens. The font turns red, and that means it's an overridden field. Okay, ProFile calculated an amount, but I said, no, I want to put my own amount in. That's going to show up in the active auditor under the override tab. Okay, and I could cancel that override by just hitting F2 on my keyboard, all right, or right clicking and then selecting the override menu. And then over here, we've got green field. Green means it's a total. Or it also might mean that the file has been locked down. You could lock a file down, and as soon as you lock the file, all the fonts turn green. And green is significant in the sense that you cannot override a field that has green font. Okay? And there's even purple font. Like sound like we're in grade 1 talking about colors, but this is important. Purple font, you'll see when you carry forward a return from last year, anything carried forward is going to show up in purple. So at a glance, you know where the information came from just by the color of those fields. Okay, let's dig down a bit deeper into preparing a T1 return. So what do you need in order to prepare a T1? Well, I don't think I have to tell you. You're more expert at T1s these days than I am, I'm sure. But you probably have a questionnaire, you probably have a checklist, you probably have an engagement letter. And tomorrow, if you come back, we'll show you how you create your engagement letter or use the existing engagement letter that is there in ProFile. You could create your own checklist and questionnaire in ProFile and send it to your client. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Of course, you'll want your client to sign the authorization, the CRA that you want them to sign off so that you could go and visit CRA's website using represent a client. And of course, you'll need their forms and slips. And then as we already showed you, you can then start entering the information. And of course, filling out the authorizer representative page is a crucial first step. And what's cool, if you're an old timer like me, the official term, if you use Form Explorer, I think is authorize or something like that. There it is, authorization request. However, I'm used to using the old term called T1013, and it still will work. I mean, it's just a search term, and ProFile still recognizes that old term T1013, which is what I use for too long to even discuss. But you could see that that opens up my authorized representative page. I need my client to sign this, and then once my client to sign this, I could e-file it with CRA. And I have a slide here that says it's not that easy anymore. There are more steps involved. CRA has modified over the last couple of years their represent client program. And so please do go to CRA's website to learn more about how to get authorization from a client. It's a little bit more involved than it used to be many years ago, or even just a few years ago. And so it's not just a simple matter of getting that authorization form signed anymore. But anyway, you want to check into that. And once you did obtain authorization, then you could go to CRA's website and view their prior notices of assessment and view all the information that CRA has on file for that client. And from there, you could then start, as we already showed you, populating those forms and schedules, the T4, maybe RSP, and so on and so forth. But you know what's even better? Why don't you just let ProFile fill all of that information in? If you got authorized by your client, and you could go to CRA's website and get all of this, because CRA's got a copy of the T4, CRA, or should is better, is a more keyword. They should have a copy of the T4, the T3, and so on and so forth. Then you could use something called autofill my return. Autofill my return is a way that ProFile can auto-populate all the tax fields directly from CRA's website. Now, here's a not complete list of what ProFile can populate, T3, T4, and so on. You can see a whole list of stuff here that ProFile will populate on the client's T1. What's required? Of course, you need your client to sign the authorization. You also need your represent the client credentials. So you need to be set up with CRA. And all you have to do then is when it's time to use autofill my return, open up the client's file, select File, Autofill my return, and then click Launch CRA website, and then sign in with your credentials, and then double check to make sure you're at the right social insurance number. And then you will see this window that will open up and it'll say successfully connected. And then you could close that window and you could view the information that ProFile imported from CRA. For example, I've got a bunch of T4 slips here. I've got 3 T4s for this particular client, and I could say replace what's already there for the city of Ottawa, for example. I've got a client that worked for the city of Ottawa. I already started filling out the T4, but then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I could just go get it from CRA's website. And so I could say, well, don't add it as another T4, replace the existing one that I started populating. And then you can see I've got other stuff here like a T4A and so on and so forth. And then there's a data import summary page that shows me all the information that ProFile has imported from CRA. You will want to check that against the slips. Oftentimes it could happen where you have a slip, CRA doesn't have a slip, or vice versa. So you want to double check to make sure that we are complete with the information. Sometimes clients forget to give us a T-slip, a T3 or T5 usually. And then you go to CRA's website and oh, all of a sudden there's some T5s there. And so working together with the actual slips and CRA, you get a much more complete picture of that client situation. You want to look at these key considerations. Yes, autofill will save time. It will ensure completeness. You want to double check the client source documents against autofill. Don't just take it for granted that CRA autofill is going to be complete. It's not a substitute for the slips and schedules. It might not be 100% guaranteed or accurate, I should say, especially when it comes to T3s and T5008. So you've got to get accustomed to the way autofill works. Is it going to save you time? Is it going to give you a more complete picture? Absolutely. I was a massive fan of autofill my return. My colleague, when I was working in an accounting office, not so much. He didn't like the fact that sometimes something might have gotten missed. He preferred working from the T-slips, but I know from history, from experience, it's oftentimes those T-slips would often go missing. Clients forget to give them to us. And again, we talked about review marks, and what I would do is I would check my work. I would go through all of the input stuff, all the stuff that the T-slips and all the information, and I would use the review marks to put a check mark. So I would compare them against the slips one last time to make sure everything is correct. And don't forget that you could use the auditor as well, especially when the auditor flags an error. You could then sign off using a review mark saying, yes, I know CPP is incorrect. Quick tip, again, you could personalize the auditor the way the auditor works. Once again, you could go to the environment options window, go to the audit tab, and then you could set your parameters, your preferences in how you're going to interact with the auditor. Once you're satisfied that everything's good to go, you will want to give your client a copy of their return. You'll want to have a chat with them, of course, telling them where the situation stands. Then you'll have to choose whether you're going to print or PDF that package for them. And you'll need signature. You'll need at least the T183 signed before you could e-file it. And what's great is now what we could do is we could use something called Intuit Sign to get an electronic signature. So CRA over the last couple of years has now allowed us to obtain e-signatures. And what's even better is Intuit Sign was introduced last year sometime, and it's integrated right inside of ProFile. And I could use Intuit Sign to get electronic signatures, to track them, use a dashboard to see where my electronic signatures are sitting. Are there any clients that haven't signed yet? I could view all of that from a dashboard. And so how do we work with Intuit Sign? First thing you have to do is manage it. So you have to manage it in the sense that you need a license. As you can see here, it's $120 for an Intuit Sign license. That's for 12 months, $10 a month on average. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Way better than having a steady stream at tax time of clients coming into your office to sign those forms, T183 or whatever the case may be. You could just do it all electronically. So it's worth the investment, I believe. So how do we manage our license and sign up for Intuit Sign? Again, all you have to do is go up to Help, select Manage Licenses, and you see I already have e-signature set up. But what you could do is you could purchase the license, or if you bought it on the phone, for example, you just select Add New and then put in your licensing information, and you're now signed up for Intuit Sign. Next step is you want to connect ProFile and Intuit Sign. Notice that you could still use DocuSign or Adobe Sign. Choice is yours. I like Intuit Sign. It's, I believe, better integrated. But nonetheless, you have a choice. And so what you would do is you could go to, let me just go over back to ProFile. You could select Options. Just get over there. Go click on Options, click on Integration, and then select the app you're going to use, in this case, Intuit Sign. And notice it says disconnect here because I'm already signed in. However, if this is the first time for you, it'll say connect. So you just click on connect and you put in your Intuit account information. You should have a username and a password that you've set up with Intuit. Even if it's your QuickBooks, if you're using QuickBooks Online, you've already got an existing QuickBooks Online accountant subscription, you could use that information and you would connect to Intuit Sign, okay? And then you would collect your signatures. So let me show you very quickly how that's done. All you have to do is once you're good to go, the return's all finished, you just need some signatures, click on File, click on e-signature, and then go to collect e-signature and select what you need a signature for. And in this case, we're going to do the T183. I believe you can go up to 5 forms that you could ask signatures for. Then select Next. And then you will want to make sure that the client's phone number and email address is there. You will also want to double check the forms you've selected for signature. And there we go. We're seeing here that we're asking for a T183. All we have to do is select Next. We need an email address for that customer. Here's the message the customer is going to get by email. Okay, if all looks good, click Next one more time. Notice I'm missing some information. ProFile is highlighting it, saying, well, you don't have an address and all that. So we would have to put all that in and then select Next. And then what's going to happen is ProFile is going to ask me, what do I want to use as reminders? I could even tell ProFile to remind the client if they haven't signed in 3 days or whatever the case may be, send them a reminder, okay? And then once that's done, I could use the dashboard. So here's my dashboard that shows me all the e-signatures that I've asked for from my clients and the status where we're at, okay? What does the client see? The client will get an email similar to what you see on the screen. The client would just have to select Review and Sign. And there's a T183. And if they're good with it, they would just check the box to say, I understand this is a legally binding representation of my signature, and then select or click on e-sign the document, and it's signed, okay? And so it's as easy as that to get an e-signature using Intuit Sign. And I believe, yes, we're done. And it's bang on 2 p.m. Eastern. So I guess beginner's luck. This is the first time we do this webinar this year. And so there wasn't really any serious advanced planning on my part. We just happened to finish bang on time. So thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget, we're going to move the discussion forward. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about Profile T1 for people who just want to, as I say, move the conversation forward just a little bit. So thank you again for being here. And hopefully we at least gave you a suitable, helpful introduction to Profile. If you're new to Profile, hopefully this will help you get started. Give me a second here. Let me see if there's any questions that maybe I could answer. So let me just go through some of these questions. Are we going to receive a PowerPoint at the end? I don't believe the PowerPoint is going to be shared. This session is recorded, however, and you could go and review the recording once it's up. You can have a look at that recording again. I see someone saying they didn't receive the training guide. Have a look at your welcome email, if you will, and there is a link there that points you to a site where you could download the training guide. So just if you don't mind, Nicole, go back and have a look at that email, and you should see a copy of that training guide. Let me just check one last thing here. Okay, no, I just was getting a message here, so I just wanted to double check that message. Let me see. Are there any shortcuts for Profile? I see that Duncan is already answering that question, so thank you, Duncan. The short answer is yes, there are all kinds of function keys, the F keys that you could use as shortcuts. You could just Google them, I believe, if you just Google shortcut keys for Intuit Profile. There's a whole pile of them. As we already talked about, F4 for the Form Explorer, F2 for overrides, and there's a whole F9 for the auditor. Let me just keep going here. So Nadeem is asking, if you have to complete multiple years starting from 2018, would you create 2024 for? Yeah, you would have to use the 2024 because you need that authorization, right? So you'd have to, it gets a bit clunky, unfortunately. But yes, get the authorization for 2024. So create a 2024 tax file, at least just with the client's contact info, name, address, phone, the social insurance number and all that stuff. Get that T183, I'm not T180, sorry, that authorization form signed. You could e-file it with CRA. If your client is savvy at all, they could go to their My Account if they're comfortable with that. I know a lot of clients aren't, but if they are, they could just go to CRA's website under My Account and authorize you. It's so much easier if they do it. I know a lot of clients don't want to do that, but anyway, if it's possible, that would be great. Otherwise, yes, go to 2024, create a T1, at least just the contact info, e-file the authorization, get their signature on it, and then we cannot carry back. So you're saying, what if we have to start with 2018? Then you have to open up a new 2018 return, put in all the information, create the 2018 package, if you will. And then from there, you can carry forward your 2018 to 2019 to 2020 and so on and so forth. That's how you could work with multiple years. Someone is asking, let me just read the question here. Would autofill my return add the needed forms equal to the slips the clients might have per CRA. Yes, in a perfect world, yes, that's exactly how it should work. The slips you've got should be exactly the same information that CRA has. They should be the same. Sometimes uh, I have seen situations where um, the client didn't have a slip, but the T3 or a T5, oftentimes the client wouldn't give me. Or sometimes I had a slip and the CRA didn't have it. This happened, for example, I had a client once who was working for a really small employer who didn't know that they had to send the T4s to CRA. So they gave the employees their T4s, but they never filed them with CRA. So I go to CRA under autofill. I've got a T4, nothing at CRA. It happens, not often, thankfully. Or someone may have amended a T4 and you don't have the amended T4, CRA has it. So that's why you want to double check. Okay. Let me see what else we've got here. Someone's saying, is there another webinar tomorrow? Yes, there is another webinar tomorrow. Um, Uh, and yes, that's exactly it. Susan is saying, I've seen new user and experienced user. Well, tomorrow is the experienced user. That's what we're calling it, experienced user. So tomorrow is part two in a sense. So you could certainly come back and attend that webinar that we're doing tomorrow. Uh, Someone is saying Intuit Sign did not work for them. Clients were unable to get access despite using the tax code, the passcode. I would suggest, Faris, that you give the support people a call, see what's going on with that. Okay, just see what's happening there. I know that it might be an issue with their cell phone provider. So they have to confirm via text a code. And Duncan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Intuit Profile or Intuit Sign only works with the big cell providers like Bell, Rogers, and Telus, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if that's changed or not. Um, I've got clients that are on Videotron, for example, and we couldn't use Intuit Sign if a client is using Videotron for their cell phone service. So, but to be absolutely sure, I would strongly recommend you chat with the people at ProFile. Uh, someone is asking, just to confirm, is Intuit Sign an extra fee? Yes, it is an extra fee. It's $120 for a year. And so you do have to get a license. And someone else is saying the same thing that we just addressed. Intuit Sign does not work with some phone providers. Yeah, I do know that that is something that could come up, where if you have a client that's not using the big cell phone providers. I don't know if that's changed. If I know Duncan is busy answering other questions, but if there's any change in that information, Duncan, please do let us know. If we purchase two licenses and are working in two different locations, is it possible for both users to access the same files? If you store them on a server somehow, yes. So, if you're using something like Dropbox, let's say, it could get messy, Um, you want to be careful that you're both not trying to access the same file. So it really depends. So I guess the short answer, Taylor, is ProFile is not a cloud service. Your files are sitting where you told ProFile you want your files to sit. That could be on your own computer, on something like Dropbox or OneDrive, and then you'll have all kinds of syncing things, how to sync the files, because that's outside of the domain of ProFile. Now it's either OneDrive or Dropbox. What you can do is you could use backup to the cloud inside of ProFile. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, where you could back up the file to the cloud. The other person at the other location can download the file, work on it, and back it back up again. But you have to discuss that with your colleague and say, listen, I'm working on this file. Don't you open it now because I've got it open. You can't both be working on the same file, especially when you're remote. Let me just go through. Is the engagement letter an option in Intuit Sign this year? I don't believe the engagement letter is an option this year. Uh, would Intuit Sign work for federal and Quebec returns? I believe federal, yes, definitely. I believe Quebec as well. But I haven't done a Quebec return in decades. So again, best bet is to contact the people at customer care or tech support, and you can
Yeah,
get the.
it's Duncan here. I can
Hey,
jump in
Duncan.
here for a couple
Yeah, thank you.
questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's an article that's being updated as we get more information about Intuit Sign. So if you just
Mhm.
go to the profile community and search for Intuit Sign, there's a big detailed article there. What's supported, what's not supported, how it's going to work. So there was a lot of issues with people not being able to use Intuit Sign last year.
Uh-huh.
We've taken that away. Product management is working on that, and there are different things that are being done to improve the service or make it more accessible this year.
Perfect. Okay.
So there's that.
Okay.
Sorry, what was the other thing?
Well, I've got another one. I was just scrolling. Is it for the firm or per computer? Your Intuit Sign license
Oh, it's per firm.
per firm. Okay, so that's a pretty good deal. That's a
It's
really good deal.
associated with the license. So whoever uses the license has access to that
Oh,
purchased
great,
Intuit Sign also.
great. And so the other question was, does it work for Quebec
Oh
signature?
yeah, it does. It's available. You can use Profile in French or English language for one thing.
Wonderful,
The
perfect,
other thing is too, you can submit forms to Quebec. Uh, you can Intuit Sign request signatures for both Quebec and federal forms. So
wonderful,
they're both supported.
excellent. There's a lot of Intuit Sign questions here. I believe the answer is no to this one, but well, we've got you. I told you Duncan's the expert. Someone wants to know if you're sending a T183 or you're asking a signature on a T183, can you send a copy of the tax return while you're asking for the T183? I don't believe you can you?
Uh, I don't think they added that.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know. For me, I would just send it by a separate email.
I hear you.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would do that as a heads up first anyway. I'm going to be sending you asking for signatures. Here's a copy of your return to review before you sign. And you can password protect PDFs that you send from Profile.
Great. Yeah, there are
PDF password protect.
right, right. There are quite a few questions on Intuit Sign.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
should look up the article.
yeah,
I really
yeah,
recommend that because there's only so much we can cover here.
yeah,
And
we've only
one,
got about a minute and a half, and then unfortunately, we have to sign off, and I'm just scrolling through the list, and there's so many questions, but thank you
we
for
got
letting
a
us know that there's an
we got a hard
article.
end. And look
Yeah,
for the just it's I just looked it up and posted it in a couple of responses, and it's it's easy to find. I just go to profile support community and then search for Intuit Sign, and a big list articles come up, but there's a big long one with detailed information.
right, great, that's great. Um, And on that note, let me see if I could squeeze in one or two other very quick uh, questions here. Is there another part two webinar beside tomorrow's? No, tomorrow is the real part two, if I could use that term. And then we start over again in November. No, we are in November, in December. So we have just the two webinars for T1. We will have a T2 webinar later in late spring after, I think it's in the month of May. So yeah, so there's only 2 webinars for T1 and 2 webinars for T2. And I think on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to sign off, but please, as Duncan suggested, have a look online, look at the community and see all that information on Intuit Sign. And please, there's all kinds of resources online, tons and tons of resources. So please, I'm sorry we couldn't get to your questions. There's so many questions.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
Michael.
Go ahead. No, please.
As you were saying earlier, there are lots of resources. So there's the Intuit community, and there's detailed articles for a lot of the topics, new to advanced, user relevant.
Yeah.
And there's also our YouTube channel. So there's Intuit
Yes.
Accountants,
Mhm.
and there are a lot of the webinars there. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So tap into all those resources, and we'll be back tomorrow. So maybe we'll see. We'll see you again tomorrow. Hope are you here tomorrow, Duncan?
yep. And
Great.
yeah, just to say, like, there's some people saying, it could have been longer as a new user, but you pointed out, Michael, very well, all the different features, and these will help people have an idea.
Yeah.
We don't answer all the questions, but they say, oh, well, there's Intuit Sign. Let me look for an article. Or there's
Yeah.
autofill. Let me
Exactly.
look for an article,
Exactly.
autofill article.
Yeah.
So you guys can follow up, like Michael was saying, with the different resources.
Yeah.
Once you have an idea what's available in Profile.
Perfect. And on that note, we're going to have to sign off for today. Thank you once again for being here. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Val, for your help. Always a pleasure working with you. And well, we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. And on that note, thanks again and take care. Bye now.